Hello, I am Javier Carretero Murillo, and I'm going to be talking about how biking helps with the brain.
Does biking help with cognitive performance? The short answer is yes. Well, those sources are mainly about cardio, also known as aerobic fitness, and how it increases our performance in inhibition, scheduling, coordination, and working memory.
Let's now focus on how we learn and what all goes in the brain. Our brain consists of many neurons. These neurons react to stimuli and work together. When specific neurons work together to accomplish a single task, they create neural pathways. Once the pathway is created, if these neurons keep working over and over again, the pathway becomes more pronounced and stronger. We can think of this as muscles. If you work out over and over, your muscles will become stronger. However, if you stop working out, they become weaker.
Well, the same thing happens to neurons. If you use them, they will become stronger. However, if you stop using them, they become weaker and weaker, and unlike muscles, these neurons will eventually become so weak they will just get destroyed and disappear. Let's tie this super quickly to what we learned in class. We learned that neurons fire action potential. Well, once an action potential is fired, neurotransmitters are transported to the synapse, which then another neuron receives such signals. Within the synapse, what happens is that the action potential gets converted to an ion, and then it enters the postsynaptic membrane that transforms such ion into an action potential. Now, the more we use the neurons, the more action potentials are transmitted throughout the neuron, which in turn releases more neurotransmitters that make the synapse stronger, creating more postsynaptic membranes. And the opposite happens if we don't use the neurons as often. You might be asking, why did you explain this to me?
This is important because what I just explained is called neural plasticity. Plastic in the sense that it can change over time. This is very important to the brain. There is a chemical that helps with the plasticity, growth, and survival of neurons, which is called brain-delivered neurotrophic factor, BDNF for short. Now, if this is said to help with the brain, what does this have to do with exercise?
When we exercise and contract our muscles release cathepsin B, CTSB for short, into the blood. Then the blood travels all the way to the blood-brain barriers where CTSB then enters the brain. Once CTSB enters the brain, it stimulates BDNF and double cortin, DCX for short, allowing them to multiply. Let's recap super quick. Muscles contract, releasing CTSB. CTSB goes to the blood, which then travels to the blood-brain barrier. CTSB enters the brain and increases BDNF and DCX, which then increases plasticity in the hippocampus.
The hippocampus, as well as the prefrontal cortex, are important for long-term memory and mood. These two regions of the brain are most affected by neurodegenerative diseases, such as Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, anorexia, and many other diseases. However, the growth of new neurons make this area strong and big. This helps slow down and prevent such diseases. Now, let's focus on the research.
There wasn't a lot of research about cycling. Therefore, I decided to expand my horizon and go into cardio in general. The first focus is going to be how increasing your cardio affects your prefrontal cortex and your posterior cingulate cortex. This test was done using the PACER test, which is a test where people go from one side of the room to the other. Whenever the participants get tired, they drop out. Figure 1 shows the regions in the brain that get activated when we do the test. As we can see is the intraparental sulcus, the prefrontal cortex, and also the posterior cingulate cortex. Here we have figure 2, which are the exam correlations to aerobic capacity. At first there is a lot of variation. However, the more aerobic capacity, the better the tests are. As we can see the positive correlation and the positive slope here on the graphs. This is the only study found for young people. The rest of the studies are focused on older adults. Next, we have a study done on 100 people. These people were divided into 3. First is the control, next is the bike, and lastly is the e-bikes. The study was placed in an 8-week period. The people with bikes and e-bikes were required to bike for at least 30 minutes outside. No indoor biking was allowed, for 3 days each week. The participants were tested on executive functions, working memory, inhibition, memory recall, spatial functions, well-being, and physical health. However, only working memory, inhibition, well-being, and physical activity had an impact. Table 1 and Table 2 are just very simple tables. The first table is just to show that there's very little variation between all the participants' education, mental health status, and physical activity. Table 2 just shows the average amount of hours spent biking and the amount of weeks spent. Here we have the average street interference score versus a session. So for this test, the lower the score, the better. Therefore, the e-bikes and the pedals are way better. Now, what test is this? So for this test, they were displayed a colored word, and then the word itself had a color, and they had to press a button displaying which color was the word. Next, we have figure 4. This displays the stop at tasks, and we have the time versus a session. The e-bikes and pedals, again, perform better because it goes down. What this test does, it displays either a circle or a square on a screen. They say stop, they don't do anything when they say go. They had to press if it's either a square or a circle. Therefore, the faster you press it, the quicker, the better the inhibition. Next, on figure 5, we're testing the working memory of the participants. Here we have the average letter upgrading score versus the session. In this test, they were displayed letters, and then whenever they removed them, they had to recall the number of letters. And here, therefore, the more recalls, the better. So e-bikes and pedals still outperform the control because they recall more letters at the end. Next, we have the mean SF36 mental health score versus the session. This was just a simple questionnaire asking them how they feel mentally and physically. And as we can see, bikes are better, also e-bikes, than the control. Next, we have table 3, which has the before and after variability for all the exams conducted. If you want, you can pause the video so you can see them, but we'll continue with the video.
Lastly, a high cycling intensity test was conducted and showed that high-intense cycling improves cognitive performance by increasing our ability to do cognitive tasks. The test was conducted with a 60, 80, and 95% max power output for each individual. Whew. I'm exhausted. The test will end whenever the participant is either exhausted or does in 60 minutes.
So this test was actually really simple. They just displayed something on the screen, and then the participant had to either click right or left hand to show if it's congruent or incongruent. Figure 7 here, it shows the response time, and there's a lot of variability, so we cannot really tell if it actually improved or not improved. However, figure 8 here does show an improvement for increased intensity in terms of the number of hits and the precision which it was conducted.
When a higher level of attention is required, the athletes showed an increase in cognitive performance. However, when the task was complex, there was a lot of variability.
Thank you so much. In conclusion, any cardio activity helps with the brain, and I hope this encourages you to go do cardio. Have a good one.